Welcome to Out with Dan, the podcast that spotlights and examines the voices of LGBTQ+ authors, characters, and our allies. Together, we lift our voices and we tell our stories. I'm Dan White. Join me as I chat with this week's author. Welcome back to Out with Dan. Today I'm excited to talk to international drag superstar Holly Stars about her new book, Murder in the Dressing Room. Welcome, Holly.
Hi, thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be here.
I'm excited for you to be here as well. This is your debut novel, but it's certainly not your first time writing. I know that you're a playwright and a comedian as well as being an international drag superstar. You also had a show on the West End that was mounted 3 times, Death Drop. Can you tell the audience what Death Drop is about? And then we'll get into the book in a couple of minutes.
Yes, of course. So Death Drop was a drag murder mystery where the characters weren't drag, but they were all performed in drag. So it was the first time ever on the West End there had been a full run of a full drag cast show. And it was kind of a pastiche of Agatha Christie's And Then There Were None, a little bit vaguely, loosely based upon. So, 7 strangers arrive for a dinner at a house on an island and are cut off by terrible weather. And one by one, they begin to be picked off and they have to work out who the killer is. And it was very silly, very gruesome. But it was very fun. And what was fun about that was we had drag artists from all over the world come to London to be in it. So we had Courtney Act from Australia came, and Monet Exchange, Latrice Royale, Jujubee. We had an amazing cast of international performers. And then some just absolutely fantastic performers from the UK scene. And the Drag Kings especially were brilliant. And it was just so much fun. It was a really fun project.
I love that. I think that's amazing. Bring it to Los Angeles. Come on.
Oh, we should.
Oh, I think so too. I think it would be a great deal of fun. So now let's dive into Murder in the Dressing Room. I just enjoyed this. This was so wonderful. Did you have fun writing it?
I did have fun writing it. Yeah, I loved writing it. I didn't know entirely where it was going when I did the first draft, so I didn't know who the murderer was until near the end, and then I was like, oh, that's the murderer. And then I sort of, revised and edited, and it went through so many rounds of edits. But yeah, it was really fun to write because I wanted to write something that was a fun camp murder mystery set in the world of drag, but that also references, but very briefly, sort of some of the challenges that drag performers face and some of the realities of drag that perhaps people aren't necessarily aware of. And so it was a fun thing to write. It was also fascinating to learn how the publishing industry works and what that process of getting a book from, my keyboard onto a bookshelf, what that looks like. I was not prepared.
I laugh because almost every author says the same thing. I think the average person says, okay, so let's say it took you a year to write the book. And then I think people say, okay, you give it to an agent or publicist or publishing house. And, 6 months later, it's on the shelf. And that is so not the case. I mean, sometimes it takes years just to go from concept to actually being published.
Yeah, it was a long process, but really useful, really interesting working with. So I got a UK and Commonwealth deal and a US and Canada. So we've just published in US and Canada. What date is it? 2 days ago.
Yes.
And it's not published for another few weeks in the UK and everywhere else. But because of that, I had 2 editors that I was working with at once. So they would combine their notes on one document and then send them all through. So it was really interesting to hear the perspectives from both markets and from both sort of creative perspectives. And I just really enjoyed the whole thing. It was just so nice.
Well, which is a lovely thing to hear because I've spoken with some authors who say their favorite part of writing is when they're editing. They love that process so much. And I also know that for some authors that slows them down and wears them out because it's your baby. You putting your baby out in the world and somebody says, "Oh, I love your baby. It's beautiful." Or they say, "Oh, your baby's a little ugly. Can we fix it up over here?" And I think that it can be very challenging, but I think that probably your career as a drag superstar has probably been a good benefit for you because you want to rush ahead, but you have to wait and you have to be in a show and you have all these things that you have to do behind the scenes before the public even gets around to seeing it.
Yeah, it does feel a bit like that. All the rehearsals and if I'm doing a stand-up show, for example, it might take me weeks to write an hour-long set for a new show, and yeah, it's a long process of getting other people's opinions, and does this land? Does this land? Is this the right kind of joke for this moment in the show? And then finally a moment on show. So yeah, there are definite similarities.
That's amazing. So one of the things that you do in this book, which I love, is we get a real behind the scenes look at what goes on with Misty Devine. We see Misty's life as a drag performer, what she goes through, the camaraderie with the other people, and then the fighting that goes on inevitably in any time you get a group together. So how important was telling Misty's sort of backstory? How important to us or to you as an author was that?
Oh, that was really important. I really worked hard on finding the balance of showing Misty as the drag persona in character doing what she's doing versus the Jo side of her personality, her out of drag persona, and how they lived their life and what the marked distinction between the two of them was. And so getting that balance right was really important. But also I thought it was important because sometimes when you watch a TV show or something that's got a drag queen character in it, you only ever see them in drag and or in the moment of their performance. And so what I wanted was to show that Misty was a fully rounded human being. She had, outside of her drag life, as Jo, they have a full life with a partner and a job and, making ends meet, working in a hotel to pay the rent. And that's the reality for a lot of drag performers. And we are sometimes, obviously, and there are wonderful depictions of it, but it's not something that we see all the time. And the focus on drag often is on the sequins and the glitter. And so I wanted to show a bit of both.
I used to know this fella here that had a part on a TV show, and they sought out a drag queen, and they asked him when he came in for his audition, would he do drag? He did not know that was going to be his character, and he said yes. But as it turned out, at that moment, and this was probably 15 years ago, they simply wanted a splash. They didn't really want to invest in the character. That's the thing about Misty Devine that you've done so well in this, Holly, is we see Misty as a fully formed person, as you say, and we see Misty as Jo. And because every human being has ups and downs. It doesn't matter whether you're a drag performer or just an accountant or a bookseller. Everybody has ups and downs. And you show us that with Misty. And that made the read so much more interesting to me because we got to see Jo when Jo was a little afraid, and we got to see Misty when Misty was fierce and fabulous. So do you find, are you a little shyer outside of drag, or are you much more like your personality as Holly Stars?
Oh, I'm probably quite Holly Stars the whole time.
Yes, I love that.
But there is, I think it is this. It won't be a universally experienced thing, but certainly a commonplace feeling for drag performers. I think is that sense of empowerment of being in the costume, of being on stage, of and that's really I extremified it for the book, obviously, with Misty using that confidence to go and try and solve a murder, which, we're not doing very often. Um, but but I think it worked for the book to have that extreme version of the real nervousness of Joe and how afraid they were to do an interview without their partner helping them, and then Misty just walking through the door and asking the questions. Like
Shoot first and ask questions second.
Exactly.
But I think that for a person who doesn't do drag, I think that most of us look upon drag performers as being fierce and fabulous, because you really do have to bring it out. All entertainers have to bring it out. You don't want to go see a singer that you yawn through the entire show. You want to see someone who brings a stage show. And I think, of course, that's what we see, the average person sees with drag queens. We see the fierceness. And I do know that for the LGBTQ movement, drag queens have always been front and center in our movement. We owe a great deal to drag performers.
Yeah, I think it takes a lot of bravery to perform in drag, and it's not for everybody, and that's okay. But yeah, that's definitely a truth.
I agree. And there's one little passage where Misty and Miles get into an Uber, and Misty notices the Uber driver's eyes. And, I think every drag queen who's ever been in a hired car, you don't really know what you're going to get when the car arrives, whether you're going to get a friendly driver or one who has a chip on their shoulder. And that was just a sliver of humanity that you slid in there so effortlessly. It was just wonderful.
Oh, thank you. Well, yeah, there's another moment in the book where an Uber spots Misty in drag and then just drives off and leaves her on the pavement. Yeah. And that is something that happens all the time. Yeah. I can tell you from personal experience. But I think what's kind of magical about drag is that it removes a social barrier that otherwise prevents people from saying things to you that they want to say to you. And it happens in all kinds of ways. So in the book, Misty is a couple of times sort of shouted at in a negative way while she's out and about in the street in drag. And those are, in fact, none of the book is based on reality, really, or, the characters are not based on real people. However, I did write those moments using words that had been said to me exactly in the way they are said to Misty in the book. Wow. Because I wanted them to feel real and true as things, I'm not making that up. That is the truth. But the other side of it is that it starts conversations with absolute strangers who will walk up to you and say, "Oh my God, you look amazing," or "Wow, you're fantastic. I love those pink sequins you wear." That's what happens. The barrier is lifted and people just say whatever they want to you. And it's quite astonishing. and it can be exhausting when you get to some of the deep, dark secrets that they tell you. But I wanted to make sure that was balanced in the book. So while she does receive some of those negative comments, she also is really complimented by strangers while she's out and about, because that's how it goes. That's how we get both.
Yes, I suspect so. And I suspect if you're ever in a hurry and you're trying to get from point A to point B, you always run into someone that needs to tell you a story. Well, and so in the behind the scenes thing, because I have seen plenty of drag performers in my life, and it takes so very much. I mean, I had to only get a shower and choose a shirt this morning. You had a lot more of I don't want to call it an ordeal, but you had to take a lot more time to get to be camera ready than I did. How long does it usually take you to get ready if you're going to do a show?
If I'm going to do a show, it depends. Sometimes, I suppose when I was doing Death Drop and it was every day for like months on end, I had it down to about 30 minutes. It depends how distracted I am and whether I'm watching Dragon's Den on the telly at the same time.
Well, I really did feel like Misty and I would be personal friends because she has two of the things that I love in life, coffee and gin. So I'm like, well, okay, we would be besties somewhere along the line of that, I'm sure.
Yeah, she's a big gin drinker, is Misty.
So is Dan. Misty and I were really in good company, that's for sure. So in Murder in the Dressing Room, Misty starts her drag life at 29. Did you start earlier or around that time, you personally?
Oh, I started performing when I was in my early 30s is when I started performing. And I started off by doing short videos on Instagram about my nightmare neighbors, Posh Sue, who lives across the street, and all the terrible things that she'd done to me. And eventually people started asking me, oh, can you tell these stories live? Could you want to come and do it in a cabaret? And so then I started telling them live, like 15-minute stories about the neighbors on the street. And they turned into hour-long solo shows. And then I was asked to write Death Drop. And then after Death Drop, I thought, well, do you know, I think I shall go back to my original dream of trying to write a crime novel and see if there's a way that I can combine the two. And so that's how it progressed.
I love that. I love that. Because, you know, one of the things you point out in the book is oftentimes people come to drag early on. And it's, you know, this world of entertaining is often about the youth. But then the one thing youth doesn't have is experience. And that is one thing that when you've lived a life and you start something new, like a writing career, you already have some experiences of the things that you like in life and the things you don't like in life. And I think sometimes as we get, out of our 20s, all of a sudden we're more sure of what we want in life.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. I completely agree. And yeah, there is a reference in the book to Misty being 35 and feeling like an old soul or something on the on the scene. And you know, as with much of the book, it's campified and mystified the whole. So in her head, she's ancient.
Well, there are days Missy and I really are just twins. There's some days I'm like, can I just lay back down on the couch and just say, screw the world, I don't care.
Oh, I'd love to do that every day. That'd be nice.
Yeah, I'm not far behind you on that, Holly. Trust me. So what's next on the horizon? Will we see Misty again?
We will see Misty again.
Yay.
So there will be at least 3 Misty Divines. And I am currently at the very end of writing the second one. So yeah, there will be more Misty, which is exciting.
It is exciting. I love that.
And then there'll be more stand-up or whatever I fancy doing next. I'm not one of these people with a career, but I can't tell you what's happening in 2 months' time.
I wouldn't have thought it'd be any other way since you're an organic writer. If you don't know who the killer is on day 1, you work through it organically. So I totally understand. This, once again, the book is Murder in the Dressing Room. Is by Holly Stars. It is so absolutely wonderful. Holly, do you have a website or social media you'd like to share with the world if they don't already know where to find you?
Yes, of course. You can find me on Instagram at Holly W Stars, and my website is hollywstars.com. And I'm also on that Blue Sky thing and Threads. also as Holly W. Stars. So yeah, that's where you can find me.
I love it. I love it. Come back for your next book, will you?
Absolutely. Thank you for the early invite. I shall be noting it down already and scheduling it in my empty diary.
Thank you so much, Holly. This has been such a great deal of fun.
Thank you. And thank you for reading the book and asking me all the questions. It's so nice.
It was wonderful. Highly recommended. Thank you for joining me for this week's episode of Out with Dan. You can find more information about this podcast and its host at OutwithDan.com, on Twitter at OutwithDan, and on Instagram and Facebook at GoOutwithDan. This podcast is hosted by Authors on the Air Global Radio Network, and the theme music is provided by bensound.com. Join us again soon for the next episode of Out with Dan.